RealClimateScience.com. The Climate Guy's setting the record straight about climate. This video is titled Climate Fraud at the New York Times. The New York Times publishes fraudulent articles about climate almost every day, but rarely is it so blatantly obvious and easy to discredit as the issue I'm going to be discussing today. The New York Times has a webpage titled, How Much Hotter is Your Hometown Than When You Were Born? New York Times, Climate. As the world warms because of human-induced climate change, most of us can expect to see more days when temperatures hit 90 degrees Fahrenheit, 32 degrees Celsius, or higher. See how your hometown has changed so far and how much hotter it may get. So let's try out their website. I've tested this on quite a number of cities, but in this case I'm going to be testing Mount Vernon, Illinois, and putting in my actual birth date of 1957. At the bottom of the page it says scroll to continue, so let's do that and see what happens. Note at the bottom of the page now it says, our data set goes back to 1960 when you were 3. Back then the Mount Vernon area could expect about 30 days per year to reach at least 90 degrees. So this seems odd. Why does their data set only go back to 1960? The U.S. has very good historical records going back to at least 1895, and in many cases much earlier than that. I'm going to show you in a minute why the New York Times is hiding all the data before 1960. But for now, let's just look at their claims about what's happened to the frequency of 90-degree days since 1960. They said that back then there were 30 days per year over 90 degrees. Now let's scroll down a little further and see what comes up next. Look at this really fancy graphics they've got. It shows that in 1960 there were about 30 days per year above 90 degrees, and it says that now there's about 41 days per year over 90 degrees. Let's see if these claims are accurate. Has the number of 90-degree days actually increased at Mount Vernon, Illinois since 1960? The official government temperature gauge at Mount Vernon, Illinois in the United States Historical Climatology Network shows the exact opposite of what the New York Times is claiming. In 1960, Mount Vernon, Illinois averaged about 40 days per year over 90 degrees. And that number has been dropping sharply, and now they only average about 16 days per year over 90 degrees. So far this year, Mount Vernon has only had 14 days over 90 degrees, much less than the 41 days which the New York Times is claiming. Also note that there hasn't been a 90-degree day in almost a month, and now that it's September, it seems pretty unlikely that they're going to have any more. So this year's been way below average, just like all recent years. Let's go back and look at the New York Times graph again for a second. They show a large increase in the number of 90-degree days since 1960 at Mount Vernon, Illinois, when in fact there's actually been a large decrease. What they're showing is completely fraudulent. Now let's continue on to their next graphic. This is their projection of how many 90-degree days Mount Vernon is going to have in the future. The New York Times is projecting that due to an increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the number of 90-degree days in Mount Vernon, Illinois is going to increase from 31 in 1960 up to more than 70 days by the year 2089. This is the actual temperature data from NOAA going back to 1895 at Mount Vernon, Illinois. You can see that there's been a huge decrease in the frequency of 90-degree days since the 1930s. In the 1930s, they got about 75 days per year over 90 degrees, and now they're down to about 16. So as carbon dioxide has increased, the frequency of 90-degree days has plummeted. This trend is the exact opposite of what the New York Times is claiming. The New York Times shows the number of 90-degree days increasing as CO2 increases, but the actual data shows that the number of 90-degree days is decreasing as CO2 increases. This graph overlays the actual thermometer data from NOAA over here on the left and the New York Times projections on the right. It's not obvious from looking at this graphic that both of these graphs are at the same scale. It goes from 1895 on the left up to 2090 on the right, and the y-axis goes from 0 up to 120. The first thing to notice is that the New York Times data from 1960 to the present is fake. They show the number of 90-degree days since 1960 increasing, when the actual thermometer data shows that it's been decreasing. But now comes the most serious part of their fraud. Remember at the beginning I mentioned that they were hiding all the temperatures before 1960? Well, now you can see why. It was really hot in the United States before 1960. Prior to 1960, 90-degree days were much more common in Mount Vernon, and as I'll show you in a minute, across the United States. No wonder the New York Times pretends there's no data before 1960, because it completely wrecks their global warming scam. This next graph shows every day over 90 degrees at Mount Vernon, Illinois since 1895. These red dots represent a day over 90 degrees, and it shows the actual temperature. Like in July 1936, Mount Vernon reached 114 degrees. But since the 1940s, there haven't been any temperatures over 105 degrees at Mount Vernon, Illinois. And in fact, days over 100 degrees have become extremely rare. They haven't had any in almost 7 years. So we can see from these red dots that Mount Vernon used to be much hotter than it is now. Their hottest temperatures were much higher, and the number of 90-degree days was much larger. 90-degree days used to occur much more common, as did 105-degree days, 100-degree days, and 95-degree days. Summers are getting much cooler at Mount Vernon, Illinois. So we need to ask, is Mount Vernon an outlier, or is it typical of stations in the United States? Well, let's look at the average for every single station in the United States Historical Climatology Network. This is 1,280 stations across the United States. Once again, we see the same trend. The percent of days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit has plummeted in the United States, particularly since 1960 when the New York Times started their data set. Now it becomes obvious why the New York Times is hiding all temperatures before 1960. Because it was really hot back then. If they started in 1960, they can kind of pretend that the number of 90-degree days is going up. The New York Times is committing massive fraud, and I document this sort of behavior by them almost every single day. They appear to have no interest in telling the truth, and when you point out to them their factual errors, they don't show any interest in correcting or retracting their articles. Their unwillingness to discuss, correct, or retract misinformation tells me that it's intentional. The New York Times wants to deceive their readers. Now, instead of looking at a graph of the number of 90-degree days per year, let's look at the number of 90-degree days versus the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We have the same y-axis, but now the x-axis is atmospheric carbon dioxide going from 300 parts per million up to 400 parts per million and a little bit above that. You can see that as the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has increased, the frequency of 90-degree days has decreased, and that the frequency of 90-degree days peaked way back at 310 parts per million. This is the exact opposite story of what the New York Times is trying to tell their readers. One data point which is relevant today is what was going on September 2nd, 1953. There were 100-degree temperatures from California up into New England. The red dots show temperatures over 100 degrees, and the yellow dots show temperatures over 90 degrees. It was 107 degrees on this date in 1953 in Illinois and Indiana. It was 105 degrees in New York and New Jersey. This next graph shows the percent of September days above 100 degrees Fahrenheit at all 1,218 United States Historical Climatology Network stations. You can see that 100-degree days were much more common in the United States during September prior to 1960, but they very rarely occur anymore. So of course New York Times starts their data set here. They don't want you to know about the hot past. They're committing fraud. The New York Times commits this sort of climate fraud day in and day out. And if we can't trust their climate reporting, why would we trust anything else that they say? Visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on junk science for a long time.